Hello students, we've reached towards the 8th lecture of the unit of mass communication, and all this while we've been learning about communication, the various modes of communication, the various journalistic ethics, then the various media laws, the various modes of censorship until we went and zeroed it on cinema. Now, in this lecture, basically, you will learn to identify and relate with the various pedagogy of mass communication studies. You'll be familiarized with the different components of film studies, and you will be also acquainted with the films of the Indian scenario. Now, in the previous unit, we had dealt with cinema, the origins of cinema, then the various components of cinema, how films came into being in the Indian scenario, and we learned about the timeline of cinema and how cinema as such evolved from being a mere one-man show to a full-fledged industry. Now, continuing with that tradition, today we will deal with documentary, the various short films, the Indian documentary scenario, the Indian newsreel scenario, the Film Division Board of India, the independent documentary producers, the ethics of cinema, the film censorship, and the censorship guidelines which are put. Now, in documentary, when we study about documentary, we'll know what a documentary exactly is, what are the definitions that has been propounded for a documentary, the various modes of documentary, and so on. Then we'll relate to what is a short film, how is it different than a documentary? Moving on to the Indian documentary scenario, the Indian newsreel, and how it failed to flourish, the film division and its functions, then the various independent documentary producers of India, the core famous ones, then realizing the fact why do we need to have cinema in India or worldwide, moving on to the process of censorship and how censorship works for films and the various censorship guidelines which are passed on. Now, when we talk about the term documentary, document itself implies that there is a process involved where you are capturing or preserving or you are trying to conserve certain ideas and notions. So when we talk about documentary, documentary in the broad sense of term, it implies a non-fiction movie that in some way documents or captures the reality. So a non-fiction movie because documentary deals with the reality. Documentary is not fictional like your mainstream media. What is presented in a documentary is hardcore facts, hardcore information, hard-hitting issues, the various social issues that engulf the society, and so on forth. So a documentary is a broad term. It's an umbrella term under which the various visuals, the various techniques of filmmaking are employed to give the viewers a slice of reality. Now, documentaries are often used to reveal an unusual, interesting, or unknown angle. Now, if we talk about a documentary, the basic difference between a documentary and your mainstream films is, even though the mainstream films do uh, attend to pressing social issues, but the difference lies in the fact that the mainstream films basically have a generalized approach. While in documentary, there is no fiction, there is a presentation of facts as it is seen in reality, and it is always focalized or prioritized towards a special angle. For example, if we take the example of um, prostitution in India. Now, there are movies which show the plight of the sex workers in India, but the movies will just generally touch upon the pressing issue and move on. But when you have the various documentaries, the documentaries will give you undiluted and raw information. So what they would do is, not only they would look into the generalized aspect, but they would take and prioritize one unknown angle or one interesting or unusual topic. So if a documentary is there on the red light area, probably as published or as viewed by the viewer, a documentary on the same would be how the children are taken care of in a red light area. What is the fate of the children who has been born and raised in a red light area? So are they getting the necessary education? Are they getting the necessary living rights? Are they getting the necessary closet or shelter from the things which they shouldn't be exposed at the tender age? Are they safe from STD? Are they not being molested? So many concerns come into being. So that documentary would deal with the children itself of the larger area. So this is the speciality of a documentary. A documentary is not generalized. A documentary will study things from an unusual, interesting, or an unknown angle. Documentary filmmakers are often motivated to make their films because they feel a particular story or viewpoint is not being adequately covered by the mainstream media. Now, of course, when we take the problem of prostitution and red light areas, the mainstream media does focus on the same, and hence our knowledge of the same. But the mainstream media would not look into those angles. Probably the mainstream media would not focus on what happens to the sex workers after they are over a certain age. Who looks after them? Do they get proper treatment, or do they have ample resources to provide a good life to the children? So, the very focus of documentary makers is not to make an entertaining, leisurely film, but the very focus is to release some information, to give the viewers a slice of the known from the unknown. So basically, a documentary is used to create a slice of reality by prioritizing on a particular story or viewpoint which is not being endorsed by the mainstream media. Now let's define documentary. Now, Sheila Curran Burnett She defines documentaries as, I quote, documentaries bring viewers into new worlds and experiences through the presentation of factual information about real people, places, and events generally, but not always, portrayed throughout the use of actual images and artifacts. But factuality alone does not define documentary films. It's what the filmmakers does with those factual elements, weaving them into an overall narrative that strives to be as compelling as it is fruitful and is often greater than the sum of its parts. Unquote. Now, when you see this definition, you'll be able to understand the broad spectrum of the documentary itself. So the documentary brings viewers into new worlds and experience. Of course, other than going through the generalized issues, the documentaries provide the viewers with newer experiences. Experiences which are not presented to them by the mainstream media. Now, through the presentation of factual information about real people, places, and events. So that's a stark component of documentaries. Documentaries are not concocted. Documentaries are not from the figment of imagination of the filmmaker. They are giving you the actual facts. They are presenting you in a refined manner the actual facts. They are not distorting the facts. So unlike mainstream movies where the facts get conveniently distorted and manipulated to fit the viewer's choice of bill, this is not the case in case of a documentary. So in a documentary, the viewer is generally exposed to the raw truth, which is portrayed through the use of actual images and artifacts. So if today there is a war documentary, there will not be a false setup where the artillery is created or the bombardings enacted. What you see is right there. It has been recorded, it has been given, it's been just presented to you. And how is that? The factuality alone does not define documentary films. It's what the filmmaker does with those factual elements, weaving them into an overall narrative that strives to be as compelling as it is truthful and is often greater than the sum of its parts. So there's no factuality in the mainstream movies. May not be. There's no compulsion of factuality in the mainstream movies. But in the documentary, there is always the emphasis on factuality, which is then creatively woven into a overall narrative. Now, the end product of such a culmination would be a very compelling, a very moving, a very thought-provoking end product, which is not only truthful, but it is often greater than the sum of what you would get via the generalization. So it's often greater than the sum of its parts. So in a documentary, that specific angle, that specific unknown angle, interesting angle will give you more insight than the total culmination of what is presented to you in a mainstream media. Now, there's also another definition of a documentary. Now, documentaries are all methods of recording on celluloid any aspect of reality interpreted either by sincere and justifiable reconstruction so as to appeal either to reason or emotion for the purpose of stimulating the desire for and the widening of human knowledge and understanding, and of fruitfully posing problems and the solutions in the sphere of economics, culture, and human relations. So this is the definition propounded by the World Union of Documentaries. Now, according to them, documentaries are all methods of recording on celluloid. So you acknowledge the process that in a documentary, to create a documentary, you need to undergo the process. Now the process is similar to your mainstream movies, how you would record your mainstream movies. So it is the process where you will film, you will record on celluloid any aspect of reality interpreted either by sincere and justifiable reconstruction. So there is a research which is encouraged in a documentary. Now, during that process of research, there might be a need to recreate the reality. So there is always a sincere and justifiable reconstruction of reality. Remember, there is no distortion of truth in the documentary. They present you things as it is. And in situations where it cannot be done so, what happens is they try to create the scenario in the sincerest and justifiable reconstruction possible. Now this is done so as to appeal either to reason or emotion for the purpose of stimulating the desire for and the widening of human knowledge. Now, the recreation, the representation of the facts or the slice of reality in a justifiable manner is essential to satiate the human necessity for knowledge, to satiate the human thirst and its curiosity. So, there is a widening of human knowledge and understanding and of truthfully posing problems and the solutions in the spheres of economics, culture, and human relations. So, the documentaries are probably the methods which are implemented by the mainstream media only because of the fact that they want it to be presented to people in an appealing manner so that it keeps the audience engrossed to watch the problems. And only if the problems are being watched and only if the problems are being creatively presented would you have your solution to the problems, and that solution could be in any spheres which would lead to the development of the socio-economic and political success of any nation. So that is the essence of having a documentary. It takes on the information, it slaps it on your face in a packaged manner. But at the end of the day, it is the sincerest and the most justifiable reconstruction that you would ever see. And the sole purpose for bringing in the raw truth, the bringing in of raw facts, the assemblage of the facts in a most natural manner as possible is because they want you to take an action. They want you to take a collective decision as the citizens of a nation or as the governing authorities of that nation. So, documentaries in sum are nothing but all the methods of recording on celluloid any aspect of reality interpreted either by sincere and justifiable reconstruction so as to appeal either to reason or emotion for the purpose of stimulating the desire for and the widening of human knowledge and understanding and of truthfully posing problems and the solutions in the spheres of economics, culture, and human relations. Now, there are 6 modes of documentary. The various modes are the participatory mode, the poetic mode, the observational mode, the reflexive mode, and the expository mode. Now we'll discuss in details all of these modes. The first mode of documentary which we'll discuss is the expository mode. Now under the word expository, now this is one of the classic styles of exposing facts or interpreting the events. So this is associated with the classic documentary and is based on illustrating an argument using images. So today, if I have to create a documentary on the process of say the process by which a certain production of a thing takes place. Now under this I would have an all-encompassing voice, and then that voice would act as the voiceover and relay the sequence of the images and events as they take place. So this is associated with the classic documentary and is based on illustrating an argument using images. So it is a rhetorical rather than an aesthetic mode aimed directly at the viewer using text titles or phrases to guide the image and to emphasize the idea of objectivity and logical argument. So in expository, what you do is basically in a refined and aesthetic mode, you present the facts as they are, and the facts are directly relayed with an intent of a direct connection with the viewer. You use appropriate amount of text titles and phrases to guide the image and to emphasize the idea of objectivity and logical argument. Now also called Voice of God mode, this type of documentary has a narrator addressing the audience directly, explaining and interpreting the events. So Voice of God mode implies that the narrator is not clearly seen, but there is an omnipotent voice, an omnipresent voice which will be constantly telling you, relating to you about the sequence of the events. So this is associated with the classic documentary and is based on illustrating an argument using images. Now it is a rhetorical rather than an aesthetic mode aimed directly at the viewer using text titles or phrases to guide the image and to emphasize the idea of objectivity and logical arguments. Now, also called Voice of God mode, this type of documentary has a narrator addressing the audience directly, explaining and interpreting the events. Now, this is also known as the newsreel kind of documentary, and the most well-known example being Triumph of Will by Leni Riefenstahl. The expository mode is still in use in almost all natural history and scientific documentaries. So if today there is a documentary on the Kargil war operation or the American forces use of artillery in the entire Iraq war operation and all, we would go for the expository documentary where each of the sequence of events are being justified and aesthetically retold in an objective and logical manner by the omnipotent narrator. Then we come to the observational mode of documentary. Now this mode allows the director to record reality without becoming involved in what people were doing when they were not explicitly looking into the camera. So, if you have to create a documentary on the occupational hazards which are caused amongst the workers working in the factory, we would go for this mode of documentary presentation. So what is happening here is this mode allows the director to record reality without becoming involved in what people were doing when they were not explicitly looked into the camera. So it enables a different approach to the subject matter, and the directors prioritize a spontaneous and direct observation of reality. So there is a direct observation of reality, of subject matter, and it is a spontaneous process. It is not like the mainstream cinema where you would ask the people to enact the scenes out for you. There is practically no reconstruction that is happening in this kind of documentary. All that is happening is basically a spontaneous and direct relay of the observation. So the filmmaker is like a fly on the wall seeing reality as the fly might see it. So there is no disturbance by the documentary makers in the experimental and observational setup. The filmmaker is considered akin to a fly. Now, if there is a fly in this room, I will merely notice the presence of the fly in this room, bearing for a few small minute-wise observances, because the fly would simply go on with its work while I resume my work. So that is the metaphorical explanation to the observational mode of reality, because in this mode people are just allowed to carry on with the work process as they want and as they can, while the subject is not disturbed and the director goes on with his modes of looking after the reality. So the filmmaker is like a fly on the wall, seeing reality as the fly might see. The idea is to record and replicate reality. In such documentaries, the subject is allowed to stand by itself as it were. There are long takes, indirect addresses, no narration, and no voice-overs. So, in these type of documentaries, uh, you just view people in the setup as they are. You will not have any voiceover. There will be no omnipotent voice relating about the events. Then there will be no disturbances as such. There is no script for that documentary. There is no reconstruction. It is directly presenting the facts as they are without any distortion of reality. So these kind of documentaries you can see like in Barbara Koppel's Harlan Country, United States of America, 1976. Now this was about a violent miners' strike. Then you have Lalit Vachani's The Star Maker 1997 documentary. This was a peep into Asha Chandra's dance and acting school. The documentary raises ethical questions also about reality shows like Big Boss, including the issue of voyeurism. Then you have Nishit Saran's Summer in My Veins, a documentary produced in 1999 in the style of a home video film, filming his mother's response to revelations about his sex life. So it is observational. Now if you take the reality show, say Big Boss, I know it is discarded by many as a trash show. But when you see the setup of the Big Boss, other than the occasional voice of the Big Boss once in a blue moon, you do see that people are just packed together in a house and their psychological and their physical attributes are simply being observed. So you have well-known celebrities who are bundled up in the Big Boss house and given certain stimulus, you see how they behave. So they have weekly tasks, and then in each of the weekly tasks they are asked to behave under certain conditions. So staying away from family, staying away from all modes of communication, just being in that setup will have a direct psychological impact and later a physiological impact on the contestants. So this is what you see in the Big Boss house, and the persons involved does not go and stop the participants unless things goes beyond control, where there is almost a physical retaliation and so on. So this is done just to see how people behave. Now there was this test conducted by Dr. Milligram, Stanley Milligram, and he was a scientist at Yale University. Now he prepared a questionnaire, and now in that questionnaire there were two sets of participants. So the two participants, by way of tossing, would be a teacher and the other would be the student. Now this is recorded in the movie called The Experiment. It's probably a 2015 movie. Now that movie, you see how this observational documentary takes place. So Dr. Milligram, in order to understand the psychological mechanisms of a person, sets two persons, one is a student and one is a teacher. Now what he does is he asks the students and the teachers to be divided via a connected room where the teacher is supposed to repeat words, and after that the students should provide with an appropriate response the moment the teacher asks the questions. But if the student fails to give a wrong answer, the student is supposed to receive a electric shock. Now, the number of wrong answers that the student is providing, the greater would be the intensity of the shock. Now, before the experiment begins, the teacher is given a sample shock without telling how many volts. So the teacher would say that it is, say, a 100-volt shock, but the student, 100-watt shock, but the teacher, once the shock is applied to his wrist, would have to assume how much intensity of that shock was. So what happens is the teacher starts taking just one shock and he realizes it is not pleasurable, it is painful. Now the experimenter tells the teachers that you assume the shock to be of 100 volts, but the shock is just 45 volts. Now you can imagine the pain you are inflicting to your students, and with every wrong answer you have to compulsorily, it's mandatory that you render the shock to your students. Now, oblivious or unknown to the teacher is the fact that the student is one of the experimenter's person. So this begin with the experiment in which the teacher repeats the words, say book, pencil, paper, pen, hair, golden, and so on forth. Now he gives the student a question like book. Now if the student is able to recall it correctly, and with book he says, say book, paper, it's correct. So no electric shock will be passed. But if the student fails to do so and the student says that, okay, book, he'll say golden. So immediately the teacher has to give a electric shock to the student. Now as the test progresses, the student who is actually not receiving the shock is supposed to scream and enact as if the intensity of shock is such, to the extent that after points the student stops answering. Now this is supposed to move the teacher, but the teacher is scared. He wants to drop off, but he still continues with the experiment until the shock reaches to 450 volts. Now, this is a social documentary which was shown that given a certain circumstance, people will provide harm to the other person, whether intentionally or non-intentionally, given the fact that they are not getting harmed in the process. So because they have a compelling authority who tells them to administer the shock, people barely do so. People barely exercise their human necessity and the human conditions of reason and continue to do the illogical task. Now, all of these being recorded by the documentary filmmaker implies that the documentary filmmaker is just a fly in the wall. He is not going and telling the teacher to stop when he realizes two things. First, the student is faking it, and second, it is emotionally affecting the teacher more because the teacher is getting affected with the fact that he does not know that he is not actually harming the student. or the teacher is not aware of the fact that he has gone through so much of emotional stress that at one point probably he might give up the experiment midway and he does not care about the outcome. So all of these would go into your observational mode of documentary. Then you have the participatory documentary. Now, the participatory documentary is more of the relationship which the filmmaker shares with the film subject. So the filmmaker has an interaction with the film subject and it makes the director's perspective clear by involving them in the discourse. So the director becomes an investigator and enters unknown territory, participates in the lives of others, and gains direct and in-depth experience and reflection from the film. So this mode of documentary is more of the filmmaker and the film. This is a one-on-one occasion. So the directives are clear, the intent is clear, and the director becomes the investigator, enters the unknown territory, participates in the lives of others, and gains direct and indirect experience and reflections from the film. The film crew interacts with the people in front of the lens. It resembles the mode of journalist interviews, which is why interactive documentary has become routine TV practice. So, in this type of documentary, the subject is answerable to the filmmaker for a action he is taking. So there is a direct exchange. For example, today if you conduct a documentary on, say, corruption, so you allow people to conduct a sting operation and then the filmmaker films the entire process by going into one-on-one interaction with the crew, a one-on-one interaction with the subject as to why did you take a bribe or why did you pay a bribe and so on forth. This is the documentary you see in a political aspect where you question certain movements of great political leaders. So if you have to know about America's moves in Afghanistan and all, you would question the leaders there. So Anand Patwardhan made the documentary Ram Ke Naam 1992. Then you have War and Peace. Now these are all participatory documentaries. That is, the relationship between the film and the subject is clearly expressed. Then you have the reflexive mode of documentary. Now in documentaries, in this mode, the subject is not only a historical character or situation, but also a cinematic representation of the same. So such films which discourage the spectators from accepting a single point of view have aroused a lot of interest among film theories and critics. So the subject here in concern is not only a historical character. He can be any historical character. He can be any situation. So the subject here has a cinematic representation of the same. Now such films which discourage the spectators from accepting a point of view have aroused a lot of interest among the filmmaker and the film theories and critiques. Now these films sometimes integrate song and dance sequence from films and images from popular television serials with the text in order to critique the visual stereotypes that circulate in a given culture. So in this kind of setup, you have the employment of materials from your mainstream media. Now all of these gets amalgamated to see the outcome, hence it is reflexive in nature. Now examples of these kinds are Fahrenheit 9/11 and Michael Moore's Roger and Me. Then we come to the poetic form of documentary. Now, the poetic form of documentary reassembles fragments of the world poetically. Now, Leni Riefenstahl's Olympia, 1938, is a classic example of how a poetic documentary emphasizes visuals to encourage the audience to understand the inner truth of the text. Now, in this type of documentary, it is not practically implemented much because it tends to deviate from the classic styles of how a documentary is showcased. So this resembles fragments of the world poetically. There is a great sense of aesthetics. There is a great sense of poetic or ornamental representation which takes place in this form of documentary. Now, Leni Riefenstahl's Olympia is a classic example of how the poetic documentary emphasizes visuals to encourage the audience to understand the inner truth of the text. The main focus of this documentary is on the Aryan athletes representing Nazi Germany at the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. Riefenstahl glorifies the athletic ability and aura of these athletes through emphasized low camera angles and slow motion editing. In addition to this, Riefenstahl manipulated the sound editing of the documentary so that the background music matched with the movements of the athletes, thus influencing an atmosphere of unity and power of the subjects. So this kind of documentaries are poetic, they are ephemeral, they have a tendency to do away with the mundane things, the mundane reality into a more aesthetically appealing process. Now, obviously in this process there is a need to glorify, there is a need to make the present flower. So Riefenstahl glorifies the athletic ability and aura of these athletes through emphasize low camera angles. Now if it's a high camera angle and it's of a higher resolution, it implies that you are presenting facts without doing any justifiable editing. Basically, you are presenting a raw slice of reality, but that is not the case here. So, in addition to this, Riefenstahl manipulated the sound editing of the documentary so that the background music matched with the movements of the athletes. So, this is not a natural setup. The athletes are playing, but the background music has been synchronized to create a synergy among the athletes and the lyrics of the music, thus influencing an atmosphere of unity and power of the subjects. Now, these obvious distortions of reality, in fact, has the intention to use the documentary as a source of Nazi propaganda to fuel patriotism within Germany and therefore demonstrate how documentaries of the poetic mode present a biased subjective reality. So you're not presenting reality as it is. It is a distorted reality. It is not objective. It's a subjective reality where the director is showing his or her own subjective opinions through the documentary. So in a real life today, if I am waving my hand at you or if I am doing this, there is no music, right? But in this type of documentary, it's not like the fly on the wall approach. You are perfectly having a mode where um, you are synchronizing, you are creating an artificial environment. And you're creating this because you want to present a biased, subjective thought process. You want to showcase the truth as you want to show. So this was used during the Nazi propaganda primarily to instill a sense of patriotism. So basically, it is resembling the fragments of the athletes and their activity in a poetic manner, and in doing so, the reality gets distorted. So this obvious distortion of reality in fact has the intention to use documentary as a source of propaganda. Why? Because you are giving information, making people view the information as they want to. You are not giving information to people the way people are enacting in their own natural way. You are instilling a sense of artificiality through the entire process. Now, let's go into the difference between a documentary and a feature film. Now, documentary is an accurate representation of real events, people, and situations. The feature film is a film that tells a fictional story, events, or narrative. So in documentary, apart from the poetic documentary, an actual documentary will give you a slice of reality. There is basically no distortion of fact. It is presentation of facts as they come and as they are. However, that is not the case in a feature, where feature films are more figment of your. It aims to educate, inform, instruct, and inspire the audience. So when you have a documentary, the primary aim of your documentary is to educate. The primary of your documentary is to inform. Aim is to instruct, give you knowledge, give you on certain arguments in a logical and objective manner, and it inspires you. So today, if I have to view a documentary on the life and struggles of APJ Abdul Kalam, it would inspire me, because even if it is reenacted, it is enacting the truth. It is giving me a slice of reality. Now, feature films are created with the aim to entertain the audience. So, आज picture देखने चलते हैं, it implies that you are paying money for the feature film, which you generally don't have to do for a documentary. Now, it deals with reality. Feature films deals with fiction. Now, documentaries usually have a low budget, whereas feature films have a higher budget than the documentaries. The reason being that is the feature films needs to be lavish. The feature films needs to inject a part of the writer's imagination into reality. The fantasy is also a huge part of it, and to give that effect, you need money and a strong budget. Now, documentaries may have recorded actions. So, when the first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, gave his first speech, Tryst with Destiny, there was no proper setup by the government division of India. So there were just two cameras which recorded his speech. So documentaries may have recorded action. There was no lavish set that, okay, the Prime Minister is saying that let's create a huge stage where I am going to deliver my lecture. I'm going to enact the entire notion of freedom of India. No, it doesn't happen. It was just the mere recording, the mere capturing, and hence documentary. Now, feature films will always have scripted dialogue and actions. The documentary may use real people and real locations. The feature films will use actors and sets. So, in documentary, there is reality. It's like the fly on the wall. It's there. You are capturing it. But the feature films and enactment of your imagination will always have actors and sets. Now, short film. A short film is any motion picture not enough to be considered as a feature film. The Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences defines a short film as an original motion picture that has a running time of 40 minutes or less, including all credits. So, short film is having there is no discount on the making of a short film, but the striking characteristics of a short film is the length. The length will determine you whether a film is a film or a film is a short film. Now, if it is a short film including credits, it should not be more than 40 minutes. That's the longest. Usually you have 2 minute, 3 minute, 10 minute short films basically. That's more popular. Now, origin of short films. The longer films were rare before 1920s, so length-based categories had little meaning. But by the 20s, a ticket purchased a varied program, including a feature and several supporting works from categories such as second feature, short comedy, 5 to 10 minute cartoon, and a newsreel. Today, if you go for a feature film, the film might be as long as 1.5 hours, 2 hours, or 3 minutes. Earlier, that was not the case. Specifically during 1920s, the feature film meant that there were several supporting categories such as second feature film, the short comedy, the 5 minute cartoon, and newsreel. So basically it was a total package. The short comedies were especially popular and typically came in a serial or series such as the Our Gang films or the many outings of Charlie Chaplin Little Tramp character. Now, although there were often no set release schedules, these series could be considered like a modern sitcom. So short comedies were usually very popular and typically they came out in the form of today's modern sitcoms. Now, animated cartoons became principally as short subjects as the newsreels. Virtually all major production companies had units assigned to develop and produce shorts, as many companies, especially in the silent and very early sound era, produce mostly or only short subjects. So you have this animated cartoons, and these animated cartoons were used as short films at that point of time given their length. Now virtually all major film companies has assigned to develop and produce shorts, and many companies, especially in the silent and very early sound era, produce mostly or short subjects. Now, let's get to the difference between a short and a feature film. A short film is around 10 minutes of your time, whereas a feature film is around 100 minutes. The short film has a very low budget, whereas a feature film has a higher budget. Now, a short film can be done by an amateur. So, someone who is just taking small footsteps, someone who has just learned about the intricacies of filmmaking will make a short film first. The reason being that because budget is low, duration is small, and it can become a practice film for them. However, feature films are professional. They are large. It requires lots of resources, money, and techniques. Now, short films are alternatives. Now, short films run with your parallel cinemas. They are short, crisp, and to the point. But mainstream movies, the films are mainstream. They have um, well set up audiences to cater to. So they are also formulaic. That is, they have to follow certain criteria. They have to employ certain film techniques, certain production techniques, certain marketing techniques, and so on to have the film made. Now, the short films are rarely screened, so it could be for a short gathering, or now it can be uploaded in the websites and so on. But the feature film is widely distributed. So you find feature films audience not only in the state but countrywide, nationwide, and internationally and globally. So the audience of short film is niche, but feature films has mass audience. Small cost in short films, large cost in feature films. Character is grainy in short films, but it's massive, glossy, and it has glamour included in the feature films. Now let's go to the Indian documentary scenario. Now, on the historic midnight of August 14 and 15, 1947, India became independent from the British. We are aware that 15th of August is our Independence Day. Now, the first Indian Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's speech, A Tryst with Destiny, was recorded by independent filmmaker Ambrose J. Patel with two cameras and sound equipment due to a lack of government documentary recording setups. So, had there been a government documentary recording setup, it would have been a full-fledged documentary which was made later on. But at that spur moment, it was merely a mere recording of the Prime Minister of Free India giving a free speech. Now, there was no media streaming or recording of the celebrations that happened later on. Though it was documented in official records, however, there is no display of the material as such. The Indian documentary filmmaking tradition dates well before independence, but there was a difference in how it was functioning before independence. Now, in 1888, a short film of wrestlers Pundalik Dada and Krishnanavi at Bombay's Hanging Gardens were filmed by Harish Chandra Shakharam Bhatwadekar. Now, Harish Chandra Shakharam Bhatwadekar, in the film, he created a short film of wrestlers Pundalik Dada and Krishnanavi, and it was filmed in the Bombay Hanging Gardens. Uh, he just the wrestlers Pundalik Dada and Krishna Navi just engaging into a wrestling match. That was it. Now, this was the first recorded documentary film in India. Now, in the 1930s, filmmaker D.G. Tendulkar, who had studied motion pictures in Moscow and Germany, and K.S. Laker, who studied culture films in Germany, brought the latest concepts of documentary films and laid the foundation of the documentary in India. Now, before independence, as you can see, it was just a recording which used to take place, but the proper nuances of documentary, like having a omnipotent voice, relating the events, a sequential arrangement in a time frame, all of that were not there until the 1930s, when filmmakers D.G. Tendulkar studied motion pictures and Germany, and K.S. Hirelekar studied culture films in Germany, brought the latest concepts of documentary film and laid the foundation of the documentary movement in India. In April 1948, the Indian government formed the Films Division and described it as the official organ of the Government of India for the production and distribution of the information films and newsreels. So, 1947, India gained her independence. The speech was just recorded by the camera person, and the lack of any government documentary recording setup led to the establishment of the Films Division of the Government of India in 1948, and it was described as the official organ of the Government of India for and distribution of information films and newsreels. The screenings of the Film Division documentaries were made mandatory before feature films at all cinemas in India. Now, from June 1949, the Films Division started regular distribution through its own distribution setup. Now, by 1949, finally, the Film Division took hold of the newsreels and documentaries, and their own distribution setup was raised. Now, the advent of digital video technology has further revolutionized the Indian documentary technique. Now, traditionally, the Indian documentary overwhelmingly favored the didactic social documentary, but now filmmakers have moved towards the internationally accepted direct cinema style, adopting its realist aesthetic and reliance on interviews while continuing to retain the Georgian voice-over narration. Now, James Georgian introduced the omnipotent, all-God style of documentary narration, where the documentary would go on, but you have one voice which will be constantly narrating to you the sequence of the events. Now, if you see the earlier documentaries of India, the earlier documentaries were more in line with, say, social issues of child marriage, illiteracy, water problems, and so on forth. Then dowry as well, the H. But now, the Indian documentary scene has evolved. So today, you find that the Indian documentary scenario has evolved to such an extent that people are opening up to newer ideas. They are now becoming open to the fact that the documentaries can be produced the way the realist direct films are produced internationally. So today, if there is a documentary on the cure groups of people, on the entire gay lesbian issues, or documentaries on how the prostitutes or sexual workers should have their rights and so on, you have a direct cinema style by which the high quality aesthetic approaches are welcomingly incorporated into the documentary making scenario. So basically, with the advent of digital video, the technology has further revolutionized the Indian documentary technique. So today, the documentary has gone from the recording stage and relay stage to a aesthetic amalgamation of facts which are creatively woven into a narrative where the uh, different facts of reality are presented beautifully in a refined manner without distortion of facts. So it's not more of the poetic kind where there is bias towards the propagation of the subject matter, but you see that they are open to the process of employment of newer techniques and faster dissemination and capturing of the reality. Now, this is the newsreel. So India's very own newsreel. Now it was released at your favorite theatre in English, Tamil, Telugu, Hindustani and Bengali by Information Films of India, Valaja Road, Madras. So this was released by your Indian News Parade. Now, the Indian News Parade was a cinematic newsreel produced by the Indian government between September 1943 to April 1946. Now, this was India's answer to British sensibilities. So, originally named Indian Movie News, it was produced in response to the Anglo-centric newsreels created by the British and American companies. So it suffered a poor critical reception and production cease after the end of the Second World War. Now, the Indian News Parade was something of an answer to the British sensibilities when it came to terms of releasing the media to the people. So the contents were basically news, then you had cartoon strips, then you had a little bit of leisurely things, a few ads and so on. However, it didn't stay for long, and by end of the World War, it met its end. Now let's go to the Film Division of India, or the FDI. Now, the Film Division of India, or the FDI, was set up in 1948, and it is commonly referred to as the Film Division in a film production house belonging to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India. Now, you saw the problem which India faced in 1947 when there was no proper production setup as such. Imagine the Prime Minister had to record the historic moment with just two cameras. So the necessity of having a proper film division arose, and it was materialized in 1948. Now it is commonly referred to as the film division, and it is a film production house belonging to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India. The primal work of the FDI is to produce documentaries and news magazines for publicity of government programs and cinematic records of Indian history. Now you see where this is coming from. This is our government's own setup, which is there to record the government activities. So today, if the embassy of Russia holds a function commemorating the Indian diaspora's achievements in Russia, or today if in Saudi Arabia a temple has been made by the Narendra Modi government to extend religious ties, and how the Saudi government has released that land to commemorate a alliance with India. For all of these and for all the affairs of external ministry and the affairs of the state, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India will take the onus of recording and disseminating. So you have today various Pradhan Mantri Yojgar, Rozgar Yojana and so on and forth, and how it's having good effect and so on. All of these will be recorded by the FDI. The function of the FDI is to produce documentaries. It is to produce news magazines for publicity of government programs and so on. Now, FDI is basically divided into four wings, namely production, distribution, international documentary, and short film festival. Now, the production will look into how they can create the documentaries of issues which would put India into a good global light. The distribution will take care of whether the documentaries produced are content-wise strong enough to be released, if it matches to the various parameters set to protect the country's integrity and so on. Then you have the international documentary section, which will capture India's international alliances with the different nations, the various speeches and the various policies implemented and so on. Then of course you'll have short film festivals under the FDI, where filmmakers from small states, the various states of India, would take part in it, will give you a slice of reality through the short films. Now, all these are FDI monitored. The division produces documentaries, news magazines from its headquarters at Mumbai. The films on defense and family welfare are produced from New Delhi. Then the featurettes focusing on rural India are produced from the regional centers at Calcutta and Bangalore. So FDI is prominently housed in Mumbai, New Delhi, Calcutta and Bengaluru. Now the division of documentaries and news magazines are headquartered in Mumbai. Then films on defense, Fauji Bhaiyo and their family welfare are all produced via New Delhi. Now, featurettes focusing problems of rural India are produced from the regional centers of Kolkata and Bengaluru. Then let's get into the independent documentary producers of India. Now, before going into the independent documentary producers, let's brush up all that we have dealt with till now. So basically, we have dealt with documentary, the types of documentary. Then we have gone into the short films. Then we have learned about the Indian documentary setup, its early innings, the differences, and from there we proceeded to the newsreel and we were done with the FDI. Now comes to the makers of this documentary. Now, most of the documentaries are funded by the government only, which are use of the government or the government probates the filmmakers to make. But India has a very strong balance of independent documentary producers. So in fact, there is an association of independent documentary film producers as well. Now let's see the few independent documentary makers of India. Now, the first is Satyajit Ray. Now, when we talk about Satyajit Ray, his direction, his finesse with the camera cannot be undermined. He was the person who led to the global acclamation of the Indian film industry during its growth phase. Now his films like the trilogy, then Pathir Pachali and all were there to showcase you about the social setup of Bengal at that point of time, primarily the tussle between the aristocratic Bengalis and the tussle between the caste and class which the working class face. Now, one of the most famous documentary of Satyajit Ray is about Sikkim. Now, this was before Sikkim was added to the northeastern zone. Now, in the Seven Sisters of Northeast, Sikkim was not included. Now, through this documentary, Sikkim, Ray painted the real picture of then Sikkim. The Indian government thought that the film was promoting Sikkim and decided to ban it. Till then, Sikkim was not under India as such. The ban was lifted years after Ray's death. Now, apart from controversial documentary, Ray also made a documentary on Rabindranath Tagore and one on famous Bengali author and his father, Sukumar Ray. Now, all his documentaries have received rave reviews. The concept of Bengalis preserving Tagore cannot be undermined. Now, Satyajit Ray, in spite of being a filmmaker per excellence, also had the documentary aspect of his skills intact. So he went on to make many documentaries, and even though they were widely received, they were more of very controversial by nature. So, through the documentary Sikkim, Ray painted the real picture of then Sikkim. The Indian government thought that the film was promoting Sikkim and decided to ban it. The ban was lifted years after Ray's death. Now, apart from Sikkim, he made the documentary on Tagore and also gave his due to his father, Sukumar Ray, who was also a very famous Bengali author. Then we have Prakash Jha. Now, Prakash Jha made the documentary Faces of the Storm years before. He made hard-hitting political and social dramas like Gangajal and Rajniti. This documentary, made in a true Prakash Jha style, dealt with the issue of communal violence in Bihar. Now, with no offences to the state of Bihar, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh and all are known to succumb under the Gundagardi regime. So there are rogues, there are hooligans who are literally running the state. Now, the social situation of Bihar at that point of time was very disturbing. Now, there were many pressing issues. Not only there were the issues of female infanticide, low mortality rates, then the pressing issues of poverty, the zamindari system still continuing there, then the struggles of the peasants, then the mohar system where before the child is born in Bihar, the child would be auctioned off to the zamindar family as slaves. So there were many pressing issues, including that of grooms being kidnapped and made to marry women. So then of course you have, like in Rajniti, it's shown the elite people and the problems of them. So you have a girl who is well educated, raised in an affluent family, but she is not given the choice to marry the love of her life. So she is put without her will into a political alliance of marriage, and thereby she is trained to take on the political reins without her willingness. So Prakash Jha, before he made such movies like Gangajal and Rajniti, he dealt with the issues of communal violence in Bihar. Now, it won the Filmfare Award for the Best Documentary of the Year, 1983. The documentary also won a national award the same year. Then we have Shyam Benegal. Now, Shyam Benegal is one of the most respected filmmakers in India. Smita Patil, who passed away, was one of his finest actors. Like you see the role she played in Bhumika, the movie, where she plays the real life struggles of an actress, Hasna Vadkar. You will see that there is always an alternate reality which is being propagated by Shyam Benegal. Now, he is often considered as the uncrowned prince of Indian parallel cinema. Now, apart from features, Benegal has made countless documentaries. Now, many of his documentaries on, say, Satyajit Ray is one of his best documentaries. The documentary was also awarded the Precious National Award. Now, apart from it, Nehru, a documentary he made on a former prime minister, is also worth watching. So, apart from the alternate reality or the parallel films which Manigal makes, his documentaries on Satyajit Ray, Jawaharlal Nehru are worth watching. Kaushik Mukherjee, he is often considered as one of the brave and mercurial directors we have today. So he is known to have a high temper basically. He is fearless, he is brave, he is courageous in the sense that he does not step back when it comes to exposing truth, and that is seen through the glimpses of reality which is captured in his documentaries. Now he achieved fame with the controversial Bengali film Gandu. His films often flirt with subjects that are considered taboo in our society. So there was a time when anything related to sexuality was something which you do not come out in open. It was a taboo subject. It was not something to be directly propagated. So Kaushik Mukherjee, in that sense, he's not this jhanda jhalaying and the slogan marching activist here. What we are talking is someone who has the audacity to deal with truth as it comes. So his documentary Love in India tries to explore the concept of sex in a conservative society like India. Now, one of the parts of such a documentary is when, say, in a place like Mumbai, where the middle class family is supposed to stay together in small chawls, and there they are supposed to procreate. So there is a basic violation of the dignity of woman as a being. So all of these were there. So Love in India tries to explore concepts of sex, sexuality in a conservative society like India. Then you have Meera Nair. Now, Meera Nair is one of the few Indian directors who has received fame and recognition even outside the country. Now, the documentary Children of Desired Sex deals with the serious issues of female feticide. So, children were killed. So there were instances that once a girl child is born, either they are left in the hospital, and even till this day you find sayings that it is illegal if a child is abandoned in a hospital. It is illegal for persons to adopt the child without registering it with a government authority. Or if a child is born, the common practice at that point of time was to crush glass. Imagine glass, it is crushed, mixed with milk, and the child was fed, and the child was drowned in a cauldron of milk. Now, milk in India, which is supposed to honor and revere the gods, I mean, when you perform an Abhishekam or the Abhishek, you offer milk. That same milk is used to commit a heinous crime of killing a child, or if the sex determination is done beforehand, they kill the fetus then and there itself. So this female feticide was documented by Meera Nair in Children of the Desired Sex, and it was widely acclaimed. Now it shows light on the controversial topic of abortion. In India, the mindset is such that if a girl child is born, it amounts to a huge economic burden. You have to feed the child, raise the child, and give the child away. And when you give the child away, you have to pay a hefty sum of dowry. Now, all of these were considered to be very problematic, and people came up with the concept of aborting the fetus the moment they knew that they were expecting a girl child. So, this particular documentary uh, throws light on the controversial topic of abortion. Then India Cabaret shows how society stereotypes a woman. It shows how some society quickly brands a woman as immoral. India Cabaret. It's almost similar to your films like Chandni Bar and all, where women are pushed into the uh, certain works which exploit their uh, sexual well-being. So women, either they are pushed into prostitution, or like in cases like India Cabaret, where they are forced into dance bar. Now, in today's civilized India, there is no harm in paying money and going to your club or disco, letting your hair loose, dancing and enjoying it. But that is not the case for many of the unfortunate population. These people who are not blessed enough like you and me have to go through the humiliation of eyes gazing on them in an inappropriate manner, and they have to do so only because of the fact that they earn a livelihood for people who cannot protect them, take care of them. So in India, there is always a concept of woman and the child being considered to be something not worth treasuring. So recently I saw this interview of Sushmita Sen, and she talks about the equation between the nurturer and the provider. Now Sushmita Sen says that when she went to adopt Rene, she met Mother Teresa, and she asked Mother Teresa, she saw that there were room full of almost 55 baby girls, and there were only 4 boys. So when she asked Mother Teresa that, Ma, why are these children mm, uh, kept in this manner? I mean, only 4 children are boys over here. Do you have a separate room where you keep the girls and the boys separate? And then Mother Teresa replied to her that these children are lucky. These children are blessed people like you and me, because these girl child will go and be adopted by a family and they'll have a lovely future. And most of the boys are already adopted, so there are no separate rooms for boys. So this is the thing. Mother Nature has its own wonderful way. Mother Nature does not let you choose whether you are having a baby girl or a baby boy. But we do have doctors who go for sex determination for a huge sum of money, and that is bad, because this in turn leads to the female feticide in a underdeveloped place like rural India, where girl childs are often considered to be burdens of the society. Now, Indian Cabaret also features the girl child being raised to a woman, as she's sent to dance bars to raise money, earn a livelihood. So the humiliation that the nurturer receives as a provider for the family is being beautifully encapsulated through these documentaries. Then, of course, you have Ritvik Ghatak and Rituparno Ghosh. Now, Rituparno Ghosh shows us the important moments and memories from the life of Rabindranath Tagore in Jeevan Smriti. I tell you, Bengalis and their obsession with Tagore. Then Ritvik Ghatak is one of the best directors a country has produced, and his film on Ustad Alauddin Khan documentary film tells about the details of the life of the popular Sarodi Ustad Alauddin Khan. Now let's go to the ethics of Indian cinema. Now when I tell you about ethics, ethics is the moral value. Ethics is the moral philosophy, which is a branch of philosophy, and it involves systemizing, defending, and recommending concepts of right or wrong, correct. So ethics always has a value of right and wrong attached to it. The moral reassurance being the intent, Indian cinema employed archetypes, stereotypes to represent qualities in their attempt to relay its messages, and qualities such as loyalty, selflessness, arrogance, devotion, scholarliness, and miserliness. The moral instruction offered by popular films upheld eternal values handed down by tradition, but most of these values were relayed in historical circumstances relevant to the times of each film. For example, among the earliest motifs in Hindi cinema is one of a strong woman as an exemplar in the reformist films of 1930s and early 1940s. For instance, V. Shantaram's Dunya Na Mane is about a woman tricked into marriage with an elderly widower and her Dutch resistance against him. So you see that there are atrocities at every step of the Indian scenario, and these were beautifully captured through these movies and documentaries. Now, in Indian cinema, the moral instruction was towards the Indian sanskar, or the eternal values which were upheld, handed down by tradition, and these values were relayed. Like Alok Nath is considered to be the most sanskari father because he is passing on the traditional values right from say Hum Aapke Hai Kaun to his recent movies where he's the loving, ever forgiving, caring, almost choking with emotion father. So there were again many reformist films which were done. So in Shantaram's Dunya Na Mane, it's about a marriage. So if you see Deepa Mehta's movies, so movies like Fire, Earth and Water all show the atrocities. If Water is about child widowhood and the child being packed into a city like Banaras, forced to living a very abysmal quality of life, you see how Lenny in an adaptation from The Ice Candy Man is shown to witness the marriage of her friend who is barely 10 years old. So that was a tradition where for monetary gains, young children or women were married off to persons who were way too elder than them. Then we come to film censorship. Now the suppression or the control of ideas, the public communication and information circulated within a society is censorship. Now censorship is the parameters laid down by government institutions, and these will control what information you are passing, the public modes of communication, and so on. The freedom of speech guaranteed by the Constitution of India can be suppressed if it is considered objectionable, harmful, or necessary to maintain communal harmony. In other words, censorship is when a work of art expressing an idea which does not fall under current convention is seized, cut up, withdrawn, impounded, ignored, maligned, or otherwise made inaccessible to the audience. So, in other words, censorship is when the work of art expressing the idea, if it does not meet the necessary parameters, it is asked to be corrected, it is asked to be revamped until it meets the set standards and parameters of the government organization. Now, let's take the example of film censorship. A classic example of censorship in India is the Central Board of Film Certification or Censor Board, which comes under the purview of Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. The board regularly orders directors to remove anything it deems offensive or subjects considered to be politically subversive. The censorship of films is governed by the Cinematograph Act of 1952. Now, it assigns certification as universal adult and parental guidance to films in India before public exhibition. So, the CBFC comes directly under the purview of Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. Now, it will regularly order the directors to remove any subject which is deemed offensive or which is deemed to cause any form of social unrest. So the censorship of films was governed by the Cinematograph Act of 1952. Now let's see a classic example of censorship. Now this movie made by Sanjay Leela Bhansali came to be under the cynosure of all critical eyes because of the unrest created by the Karni Sena, who thought that this movie defiled the strong Rajput tradition. They thought that this movie demeaned the Rajput women's courage and valor. So this movie was finally made to release after almost 300 cuts and lots of disclaimers and the changing of the title from Padmavati to Padmavat. So you can imagine the form of censorship which goes for a film in India, and this film, even before it was released in India, was clearly okayed by the US and UK governments, but it was not allowed in India. The reason being such that the parameters are so strong that even when the film got released in certain states, it was yet not released in many parts of the Indian country itself because of the fear of communal violence. Now, after the film was released and after the Karni Sena also okayed the film, saying that it does not defile Rajput women, it's very ironical for them to say so because during that period of filming, people were killed, murdered, people committed suicide, and there was a huge unrest. There were death threats that were issued to the actors of the films and the makers of the films. So finally, Padmavati was released as Padmavat. Now, There are many film censorship guidelines that are provided. So the Cinematograph Act of 1952 has been passed to make provisions for a certification of cinematograph films for exhibition by means of cinematograph. So under this act, a board of film censors, now renamed as Central Board of Film Certification, with advisory panels at regional centers, is empowered to examine every film and sanction it whether for unrestricted exhibition or for exhibition restricted to adults. The board is empowered to refuse to sanction a film for public exhibition. Like in the case of Padmavat, the film was refused for public exhibition because of the fact that it might create unrest in the society. Again, it classifies universal films, all sanskari films, Hum Aapke Hai Kaun and your Hum Saath Saath Hai, everything gets universal accreditation. Then you have films which have exhibition restricted to only adults, like Deepa Mehta's movies and all. Then you have unrestricted exhibition for films which are very sanskari by nature. So that's the thing with film censorship guidelines in India. It is the Board of Film Censors, the CBFC, which is primarily the determinant authority for the release and exhibition of the movie in India. So only if the CBFC says yes would the film be distributed across India. Now let's see the censorship guidelines. Now according to this act, copyright means the exclusive right to commercially exploit the original literary, dramatic, artistic, musical work, sound recording or cinematographic films as per the wishes of the owner of copyright, subject to the restrictions imposed in the Act. Now, according to the copyright, right, the exclusive right to commercially exploit the original literary, dramatic, artistic, musical work, sound recordings or cinematographic films as per the wishes or against the wishes of the owner is imposed in it. So basically, they do not call for any forms of plagiarism. Now, although this act is applicable to all branches of media, in some of the areas it is specific particularly to the film genre. So in case of the cinematograph film, to do or to authorize the doing of any of the following would directly lead to the infringement of your copyright. So if you make a film and if someone copies your film, that's the first infringement. Now, to cause the film in so far as it consists of visual images to be seen in public and so far it consists of sounds to be heard in public is also violation of the copyright. Then if you make any record embodying the recording in any part of your soundtrack, then you utilize the soundtrack, it's a plain violation of copyright. And if you communicate the film via radio diffusion, then it's a massive violation or breach. The Act also makes it cognizable offense for anyone to sell, hire, distribute, exhibit, possess, or view any unauthorized recordings and prescribes severe penalties including imprisonment, fines, as well as confiscation of the equipment used for the purpose of recording and exhibition. Now, the amendments to the Copyright Act also prohibits unauthorized transmission of films on cable television. So when you see a new movie being launched, you see that at least there is a time period of 3 to 4 months before it's finally released. Now, the guidelines works in this way. So you have the cine workers, cinema theater workers Regulation of Employment Act. Now, this legislation affords a measure of protection to those employed in the industry by imposing certain obligations on motion picture producers and theater owners concerning the former's condition of service. Then you have the Cine Workers Welfare Cess Act 1981 and the Cine Workers Welfare Fund Act of 1981. Now, under this act, they create a financial support to the cine employees, the seasonal and unpredictable nature of employment, which often leaves them impoverished and helpless. Then you have our very own Bombay Police Act of 1951. It contains provisions which empower the police to regulate the exhibition of films, particularly in the state of Maharashtra. Now, Mumbai is a film city. The films get launched here. You have actors, you have releases happening live there. So, you need a regulatory board. So, the regulatory board is issued now under by the Bombay Police. It was issued as early as 1951 to regulate the exhibition of films in the state of Maharashtra without causing any social unrest. Then you have Bombay Cinema Regulation Act of 1953. Now, it provides a scheme for state licensing. Now, under this act, the cinema theaters and motion picture theaters are given a license to exhibit the film. So the sitting, the fire safety drills, the sound, the condition of escape during disasters, everything comes under it. Then the Bombay Entertainment Duty Tax of 1923. Now, it imposes a tax on public exhibition of motion pictures and other forms of entertainment. Now, according to the Bombay Entertainment Duty Act, a tax is levied because a picture is exhibited, the picture is reaping a revenue, and you must have come across that there is a regulation on the water bottle prices and food which is sold in the movie theaters because they have manifold revenues from the fact that a bottle of water which costs around 10 to 15 rupees is sold for say 140 rupees or so. So all these factors, the extra income and everything is monitored through this guidelines. Now, with this, we come to the end of this lecture, and having done with this, we have learned about the various processes by which the cinema is objectified in the screens. Thank you.